Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us online on live stream. I'm Trisha Saklecha. I am the director of the Tagore Center. And on behalf of the Tagore Center and Embassy of India, Berlin, let me first wish you a very happy Holi and welcome you all to the panel discussion to mark International Women's Day. So we're gathering here today to speak on a very fundamental and important topic, women's empowerment in India from a constitutional and developmental perspective. It's a lofty subject, right? So much has been said about the importance of women having equal rights, equal opportunities, equal respect, and we tend to circle back to it every year on International Women's Day. So what we're doing here today on this panel is we're taking this rather lofty subject and breaking it down into two parts, constitutional and developmental. Our Indian Constitution is a progressive document. It was written under the chairmanship of Dr. Ambedkar with substantial provisions for equality. The Constituent Assembly had 15 constitution makers who were women. So what that means is that our Constitution, and by extension our legislature, has always addressed and reflected a woman's thought and experience. It's always protected women's rights. It is unique in that it is one of the very few constitutions in the world that extended the right to vote to women from its very inception. So for all intents and purposes, we have always had a constitution that is feminist and has protected women's rights and position. But what we have seen in the last few years is a seismic shift in that suddenly our constitution has become this living document that more and more women are engaging with and taking ownership of. So over the next hour, we will explore the impact and consequence of this increased access and engagement and what this means from a women's development and national development point of view. We've got a very distinguished panel of three incredible women who are experts in law, experts in gender studies, and experts in female entrepreneurship. So I'm looking forward to a very engaging and enlightening discussion. I would now like to invite Shri P. Harish, who is the Ambassador of India to Germany, to make his inaugural remarks before we move on to the panel.
Dear friends, let me take the opportunity to first of all welcome our distinguished panel and each one of you who has joined us through this medium today as we mark International Women's Day and also celebrate Holi. Let me wish you and your families a bright and colorful Holi and a bright year ahead. Friends, I think as we look at the topic that's been outlined by Trisha for today's event, we have to remember that the Indian Constitution was a visionary document at a time when most established democracies had not granted women the right to vote. I think it was a vision of our founding fathers and Dr. Ambedkar, who led the team to envision a democracy where women had the right to vote and universal suffrage was incorporated as a fundamental principle of our democratic polity. Beyond that, I think the principle of equality and specifically gender equality was also enshrined in the Constitution, the preamble, in our fundamental rights, in our directive principles of state policy and fundamental duties. The Constitution not only grants equality to women, but also empowers the state to adopt measures in favor of women and women's rights. We have thereafter, as an independent republic, also ratified many international conventions, especially the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, the CEDAW, in 1993. Our Supreme Court too has interpreted the Constitution and its provisions to enable such equality for women. Yet the situation, as we know over the years, has seen a significant gap in terms of the rights enjoyed by men and women in our country. We all have seen the efforts of our government to work towards bridging the wage gap. But as we have seen, there are other significant differences too that have emerged. There is also a digital access gap as we increasingly go digital in our country. There is, of course, an employment gap, and this is a very significant aspect which needs to be bridged if we are to achieve the goals that the nation has set for Amrit Kal. Our Prime Minister has truly said that this International Women's Day, we must renew our pledge to make women an equal and integral part of our development journey, without which the transformation of the country and the goals set for Amrit Kal and for 2047, which marks 100 years of India as an independent nation, cannot be achieved. For this transformation, it is vital that women come in as equal and development partner to bring about this transformation. In the last few years, there have been huge initiatives in bringing about inclusion of women in the development journey. Over 230 million Jan Dhan accounts have been opened to bring about financial inclusion, which is very critical. Elimination of any intermediaries and direct provision of assistance to women into their Jan Dhan accounts has been a top priority. The various schemes of the government, including the Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana to provide support for the education and marriage of young women, the Mudra Bank to help women move towards entrepreneurship, and of course the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao Yojana to bring in a fundamental shift to bring in a focus on the education of women have been extremely successful. Friends, as we look at taking India to a sustainable development path, there is a growing realization that the first 5 SDG goals, which are there of no poverty, of zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, and gender equality. The first 4 SDGs cannot be achieved until we focus on the 5th SDG, which is of gender equality. I think these 4 very much depend on the realization of the 5th Sustainable Development Goal. I think even the goals of clean water and sanitation, clean energy, decent work and economic growth, and innovation, all of these are focused on the premise that we are able to bring about gender equality. The message that women lead the transformation towards a new India is not just a slogan, but as the Prime Minister said, it's a realization that without Nari Shakti, the transformation of India would not happen and would be incomplete. Within the Ministry of External Affairs, where we all function, there is a whole paradigm shift as we focus on having all women passport Seva Kendras brought about under the leadership of our late former foreign minister, Srimati Sushma Swaraj. We have brought about many measures for the welfare of women, including signing of labor and manpower cooperation agreements with various countries in the Gulf, which were focused on labor-related issues, including that of women workers in the Gulf region. We have also conducted many pre-departure orientation training and local language-based media awareness campaigns for educating departing women workers who are going to these countries to work. Let me also give how the landscape has changed during our own lifetimes. Personally, I can say that when I was a student in my engineering college, we had no girl students in mechanical engineering where I graduated from. And today, when I go back to my college, I find that more than 50% of students are girls. This is a huge change in a matter of 3 decades. Even in government, when I joined my batch of the Foreign Service, we had no women colleagues in my batch. But today, if you were to see any young officers, you will have a very good representation of women. So in the last 30 years alone, we have seen the kind of transformation that has happened. We have women joining the armed forces, the law enforcement agencies and the police. I think even in an all-women police force for the UN peacekeeping missions, which has made significant contributions in holding our flag high. I think on this Women's Day, let us pledge to work towards a better future for women and women's equality in India. Prime Minister said that whenever we hear of instances of crimes against women, our heads hang in shame. Yet we must walk shoulder to shoulder to end all forms of discrimination or injustice against women. The government is setting up many legal advice and psychological counseling to women who face violence or abuse, and is also commencing a mobile helpline to enable women to dial 181 for access to counseling and referral services. I think this marking of International Women's Day every year gives us an opportunity to review the status, to see what more we can do, and to bridge this gap, because without that, neither half of humanity nor the country can achieve its full potential. Thank you very much. And once again, my deep appreciation to the distinguished panel who have agreed to join us on this day. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you, sir, for that enlightening message. Now, before we move on to our panel discussion and before I introduce the panelists, I should let the audience know what the format the event will take. We are going to go to each panelist and ask them to make their remarks for about 8 to 10 minutes, and then we'll take questions from all of you in the audience. So please feel free to post your questions on YouTube or Twitter or any of our social media channels, and we'll get to them. Right. So to our very esteemed panelists, first up, we've got Dr. Sudhir Rajiv. Dr. Rajiv is Vice Chancellor, Haridev Joshi University of Journalism and Mass Communication, Jaipur. She has served as Dean, Faculty of Arts, Education and Social Sciences, as well as Professor and Head of Department for English at Jai Narayan Vyas University of Jodhpur. She was also the Director of Kamala Nehru College for Women and Founder Director of the Center for Women's Studies at Jai Vyas University. She has been nominated as member of the Rajasthan State Higher Education Council. She has also held additional charge as Vice Chancellor of Jagadguru Ramanandacharya Rajasthan Sanskrit University, and currently has additional charge of Vice Chancellor of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar Law University, Jaipur. Dr. Sudhir Rajiv did her PhD on African American literature in 1985, and her book Forms of Black Consciousness was published in 1992 from New York. She has guided research and published widely on South Asian literature, African American literature, global English and women's studies in India and the US. Dr. Rajiv has teaching experience of more than 4 decades and is among the very few double Fulbright scholars in the country. With her depth of passion and enthusiasm for social causes centered on women and equality, she has written multiple papers on issues of cultural and social importance with a focus on women's empowerment and gender equality. Welcome to the panel, Dr. Rajiv. Next up, we've got Dr. Tasneem Dio. Dr. Dio is a guest lecturer at National Law School of India, Bangalore, and National Law University, Delhi, where she teaches courses in Indian criminal law and criminology. She has worked closely with government bodies on aspects of criminal justice reform in India, having submitted reports to the National Commission of Women and the Bureau of Police Research and Development on police public relations and crimes against women. Dr. Tasneem is currently pursuing her doctoral studies at Yale Law School, where she earned her LLM degree, thereafter moving on to receive the MSc degree in criminology and criminal justice from the University of Oxford. Her research interests lie in locating the impact of gender on the realization of rights more generally, and with a focus on criminal justice system in particular. Welcome, Dr. Tasneem. And last but not the least, we have Umang Sridhar, who is a social entrepreneur and founder of Umang Sridhar Designs. She is a graduate from the University of Delhi and NIFT Bhopal and a fellow of School for Social Entrepreneurs India. Umang started her journey in social entrepreneurship with an NGO in 2013. And since then, she has successfully created an innovative, handcrafted textile enterprise which works with over 1,500 artisans in 17 clusters and 5 states. Umang's company has collaborated with NASCOM Foundation to train 200 tribal women in Bagh village of Dhar district, Madhya Pradesh. The training includes financial modules, entrepreneurship modules, and digital skills. The training focuses on graduating women from artisans to craft entrepreneurs. With this program, they aim to do capacity building and create market linkages and funding support to clusters and its women artisans. At the moment, they're training 375 women across Siddhi, Morena, Maheshwar, and Tarapur clusters in Madhya Pradesh. Umang's dream is to train 1 million female artisans to become entrepreneurs in the next 5 years. In 2019, Umang was featured on the Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia list, and in 2022, she was handpicked by the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji as an inspirational female founder during the launch of the Madhya Pradesh Startup Policy. She has also been recognized as one of the Wise 100 by NatWest London. So, to our esteemed panel, thank you for joining us and thank you for helping us mark International Women's Day. I would now love to invite Dr. Sudhi Rajiv to deliver her opening remarks.
A very good morning and good afternoon to the esteemed panelists, the audience. I must first at the outset thank the ambassador of India to Germany for calling us, putting us all together to interact and to learn on this International Women's Day. I wish you all a very happy Holi and greetings on International Women's Day. I think the tone was set by the esteemed ambassador, and he very, very clearly and succinctly, traced with before us what is it that we have done. I have myself seen in my own lifetime the changes that have been brought about and in terms of gender equality. So I would begin by stating the obvious that we have a woman president, we have had a woman prime minister, many governors, many chief ministers who have been women and who have done us proud by being there. But still, we are talking of gender equality. This year's theme for the International Women's Day is equity for all. So I think this equity and equality, these two things are the things which I think we need to talk, because we may have been empowered, but when it comes to gender mainstreaming, I don't think we have come very far. Let me begin by giving you a little of the statistics that I gathered by reading the newspaper, I think two days ago. And it was stated that out of the 4,120 MLAs in the country, only 9% are women. Rajya Sabha has around 10%, and the Lok Sabha 14% in the as members of the Rajya Sabha or as members of the Lok Sabha. So what has happened is that we can see these things at the top, but the top down is, I think, something that we still need to work at. That is not to say, because I'm very proud of the ordinary Indian woman who has contributed to the growth of the economy in many ways, being unnoticed, and yet she has made a difference by their being there. For example, I was reading that there are about, out of the manual scavengers, out of that, 75% manual scavengers are women. So while we celebrate women empowerment while we mark the International Women's Day, and each time we pledge that we will move forward. I think these statistics give us the strength to work harder, because at a certain level, the urban educated woman may have, and my the word that I'm using, may have achieved a certain level of empowerment. But I think largely, when I look at, the three things that I look at, the three phases of women's development was, the first was women welfare. And I think it was a derogatory way of saying that someone is doing something for the benefit of someone else. Then came the phase of development, women's development, where there was someone else who was giving you, who was developing you or doing something for you. And the third phase was the women empowerment phase. So the Constitution in 1947 gave us the strength to see women as individuals and not as a part of any aggregation, right? So, individuality of women was to be respected versus, she being the mother, the daughter, the wife, the roles in which we see women. So the roles were important for us. We respect our mothers. We don't want our sisters to be harmed. But when it comes to women as an individual, I think that there is some gap that needs to be filled in. But during the colonial constitutional acts in India, women with education and wealth had the right to vote. But when India became free, then the makers of modern India, they provided universal franchise: one person, one vote, one value. That is, it was not like the 3/5 compromise that one saw at the beginning when the American Constitution was being framed. So, for a hierarchical, feudalistic society that India was in the colonial times, it was a very difficult trajectory to travel and provide universal franchise, universal right to vote to everyone. So, the value of self, my vote and its value, that became very, very important. So, in the beginning, our democracy was protective democracy, which means that the government cannot control us. There was this feeling that the state cannot control us. That is the root of democracy, right? But then came the developmental democracy, where citizens take pride in being able to vote, in being able to elect. So the women's vote gave political empowerment to women. But when I talk about this, I also want to talk about the women's liberation movements. In the West, when it started, it was, it was against men. But in India, what happened was that Ishwarchand Vidyasagar, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Jyotiba Phule, all these people participated, and they did work and helped women in getting education, in getting independence. So there is one quote that I always like to use: women's liberation is not about biology, but it is about ideology. So, what do you think is important, right?
Well,
So,
thank you, Dr. Sudhir Rajiv. I think that quote is incredibly powerful. And it's a great sort of jumping off board for, I think, Dr. Tasneem, who's got quite a lot to add on that aspect. So we might take it to her and see how we can develop this idea further.
Thank you, Trisha, and thank you to the Tagore Center for having me today. Also to the ambassador for his insightful comments, and to my fellow panelists and the audience. I look forward to engaging with you on this exciting topic. A constitutional perspective on women's empowerment in India, which is the theme for today's discussion, encompasses very many aspects. From the role of women in shaping and safeguarding the Constitution to provisions which recognize the rights of women and assist in their realization, from women's movements that were grounded in the constitutional scheme to landmark cases that have spearheaded reform, from constitutional aspirations surrounding gender equality to the statutory and policy framework giving voice to those goals. While each of these aspects is worthy of course, detailed discussion and extrapolation, I'd like to use the time that's been given to me to speak to very briefly talk about another aspect of women's engagement with the Constitution in modern India, which is the Indian woman of today and her relationship with culture, Constitution, and the language of rights. Given that this discussion is being conducted under the aegis of the cultural wing of the Tagore Center, I felt that this forum would be appropriate to explore this issue a little bit. So women and womanhood have been an integral part of the Indian constitutional ethos. As participants in the struggle for independence, women helped identify the principles upon which the idea of India was constructed. Thereafter, as members of the Constituent Assembly, women helped draft the provisions of the Constitution, which would form the foundation of the Indian Democratic Republic. And today, as legislators, judges, lawyers, academics, members of civil society, women continue to safeguard the values of the Constitution on a daily basis. The Indian Constitution, of course, has several provisions that are aimed at ensuring gender equality. From provisions that guarantee equal protection of law, equality of opportunity, rights against discrimination, and also provisions for reservation in government. The Constitution also places obligations both on the state and on citizens. It calls upon the state to have, more humane conditions of work, maternity benefit. It calls upon citizens to renounce practices which are derogatory to the dignity of women. Similarly, the Indian statutory framework is built to supplement these safeguards and these promises. And this is true across legal regimes, right? So the civil law, criminal law, statutes that focus on commerce, and it's also true across sectors, whether it's the social sector, the political sector, or the economic sector. Suffice to say, the women of India are not invisible in the Indian Constitution. Neither are they strangers to the language of rights. To the contrary, in fact, it was Hansa Mehta, all the way back in 1947-48, she was one of the 2 female delegates to the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, and she's widely credited with changing the phrase, all men are born free and equal, to all human beings are born free and equal. This is Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So while the knowledge of the language of rights is not necessarily new to the Indian woman, recent years have seen important developments in its articulation, in the way in which women engage with the Constitution using this language of rights. One such development is the need for a new and more nuanced vocabulary of rights in light of the Indian woman's desire to express her cultural identity whilst at the same time cementing her constitutional position. We all know that India is celebrated for its cultural heritage, its heterogeneity, its color. Today is Holi. Happy Holi to all of you. The vibrancy of the cultural practices of its people. At the same time, India is recognized for being the largest constitutional democracy in the world. These 2 aspects of India, its tradition and its modernity, are reflected in the law's treatment of women, and it is also reflected in women's own appreciation of themselves as legal entities. Oftentimes, the Indian woman's cultural identity and her constitutional identity are seamless, and very often they are even complementary. But at other times, they may appear as if in conflict with one another. I'd like to use one example to kind of give life to the point I'm trying to make here. And that is a recent case before the Supreme Court of India. This case pertained to the entry of women in the sanctum sanctorum of a temple that is dedicated to a celibate male deity. The majority decision held that the bar against the entry of women is a violation of their fundamental rights. It is noteworthy, however, that the single dissenting opinion was by the only female judge on the bench, who held that such a bar to entry was an essential part of the practice of the faith. It is also noteworthy that among those who protested against this decision and also engaged in violence against some women who were trying to enter the temple were several other women. What does this image of female devotees throwing stones at women who are exercising their constitutional right to enter a temple tell us about the tussle between culture and constitution? Does an Indian woman have to choose between expressing her cultural identity and demanding her constitutional rights? Is she more emancipated as a legal entity than she is culturally emancipated? Or is it just that some Indian women are speaking a language of rights that other women simply do not comprehend, or perhaps more tragically, do not think necessary? I dare say the answer to each of these questions is actually a considered no. In fact, these instances, which become characterized as a culture constitution conflict, are in fact examples of how Indian women are finally taking ownership of this living document that we call the Constitution. For long, the Constitution has been used to protect women, characterizing them as objects of constitutional litigation. Today, women are using the Constitution to protect themselves. They are subjects of constitutional litigation, and through it, they are drivers of constitutional reform. The modern Indian woman is embracing her cultural identity in the context of her rights under the Constitution. For her, an escape from cultural practices that are marked by, patriarchal notions of femininity is not a matter of luck. It's not about having understanding parents or a kind husband, but it is a matter of constitutional safeguard, one that is to be agitated and articulated using the language of rights. At the same time, a respect for cultural practices and the freedom to express her cultural identity also necessitates similar articulation. I'd like to conclude by saying that there are some important takeaways from this realization of the Indian woman's engagement with her culture and her constitution. First, that women who choose to rely on the language of rights are not necessarily in conflict with the cultural aspects of what makes them Indian. Second, the Constitution is relevant both for the culturally conscious Indian woman as well as for the culturally agnostic one. And third and finally, the knowledge of the Constitution and an ability to articulate through it are tools, in fact, for the modern Indian woman who does not want to leave her position in the social, political, and economic hierarchy up to tradition and chance. So whether it be rewriting vows of the traditional Indian marriage ceremony or challenging the denial of entry to a place of worship, the Constitution of India can pave the way for the full and proper expression of cultural identity by the women of India. Indian women are staking claim to the Constitution as a document which allows them to, and this is something that the UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights says in her 2012 report, this staking claim to the Constitution allows women to actively engage in identifying and interpreting her cultural heritage and traditions and deciding which practices or values or traditions are to be kept, which are to be reoriented, which are to be modified or discarded. It's an exciting time to be an Indian woman holding the Indian Constitution, simultaneously embracing her cultural heritage and her constitutional rights. And I hope this exciting time continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasneem. That's, I think so much of what you pointed out is extremely pertinent, where we've got this sort of tussle between culture and constitution, and we've got we're seeing impact of it on a day-to-day basis on the ground level. And I think that's what, Umang, I'd love to bring you in on from that point of view, because you're working, as Dr. Sudhir Rajiv said, it's not merely about the urban woman, but we've also got to think about what's happening in our rural communities and what's happening with women who have not traditionally had access to education in the same way. So I'd love to hear your take on that as well. Umang, you'll need to unmute yourself, please.
My bad. Thank you so much, Trisha, for having me here. A very warm welcome and good morning and good afternoon to fellow panelists and to the Ambassador of India to Germany. This is an honor. Very happy International Women's Day and happy Holi to everyone. I am, like I said, I'm a social entrepreneur. I work with women on the in the rural areas. And while I was listening to each one of you, I think I can see, I could feel how our women, women who I work with, um, reflect on the matters that we were just discussing. Um, our work is very traditional. It's the culture of India. I mean, we are known to be the textile country of the world. We make 99% of handloom textiles in the world. Um, every woman in this country holds the culture. I mean, she has been the flag bearer of the culture of this country, and I think textiles and the craft has been the foremost thing about that. So when I talk about Indian culture and women being the flag bearer, I work with amazing women who definitely don't know constitution, or they are not even educated, but the way they feel powerful because of practicing the craft that they are practicing, or following the culture of this country. I think the culture only is so strong that it has built such a beautiful constitution. So our country is, I mean, the social culture of the social framework of this country was about caste system. And while people have really as in disintegrated this whole system, but I proudly believe in this system, because the country which has all these castes were as in they were identified by the skill sets of people. The caste was not about who's upper class or lower class, or this is very Western. I mean, for India, it was about the skill sets of people, what skill sets a person or an individual holds, and that was the identity of that person, of that community, of that family. So I thought that if I as an entrepreneur focus on bringing this side of our society in front of the world, that we are not about dividing people on the basis of caste and uh, economic backgrounds. We are about identifying people by their skill sets and then empowering them and celebrating them. So our constitution definitely gives importance to people with different cultures. We are known for our diversity, and our company, Umang Shrita Designs Private Limited, focuses on celebrating the diversity and the beauty that our country holds. And women are the center of it. I mean, we work with 15. Now we are working with around 2,000 artisans, and 80% of them are women. And we have stories to tell. I mean, when I go to women in the rural areas, my first interaction with one such women spinner, why the women who changed my life, I think she taught me why it is so important to be a woman, why it is so important to be a woman with skill set, and just understanding the value of herself. I'll just share this small story so that people know that, how empowered and strong women of India are, and, and how strong our constitution is, that it has provided that platform for them to feel powerful. Um, I was only 21 years old when I met this amazing woman in one of the villages of Gwalior district. She is happened to be a spinner, a woman who spins the hand charkha on which we make the yarn, the beautiful yarn. I was sitting with her in her small house, and I was asking her a lot of questions, that why she does what she does, and how she learned this. And she was just telling very humbly, she was telling her story that she was only 9 years old when she first started spinning, and now she's 60 years old. So for last so many years she has been spinning. She was a child widow, so she took care of her 3 kids, raised them with the help of this charkha. And uh, and and then she asked me to look at a wall, and she said, can you see something that I've earned in this lifetime? um, and it was a national award. And she said, by just spinning this charkha, by just embracing the culture of this country, I have received a national award in the House of President. I mean, in the President's house, I was invited by the President, and I have received this award by just spinning the hand charkha. So I think that's the beauty, by just following the culture and the constitutional right given to her. She has so much power, and she empowered me that day to, and she gave me that vision that this is what, the women of India don't really need. A lot of education, they don't need powerful jobs, and they just need identity, they just need space where they can actually celebrate and practice their culture. And Constitution of India gives them right to do so, and also it gives them a platform where they can come and celebrate, and everyone can get motivated by that, by their journey. So I think there are many such stories, and it's been just amazing. I mean, working with tribal women, I think I want to take this opportunity to also talk about the rights of tribal women in this country. I think they're the most powerful. They do all the hard work. They go to fields. They do all the hard work. They are the decision makers in their community. And a small, like, in where I work in Bhag, in Bagd village in Dhar district. There's a festival called Bhagoria Festival, where the women choose the men to actually, and she can actually run away with that man to marry him. So these are the cultural. This is the culture of India. I mean, it's so powerful already, and now that we have a strong constitution, I mean, that's where I feel that women and constitution and culture goes hand in hand. Um, I'll thank you
Yeah.
so much for giving me this.
Thank you. Thanks, Umang. I think that's a wonderful story and a very inspiring story. And it really demonstrates how that gap between tradition and identity that we've been talking about doesn't necessarily need to exist, and how sometimes the place where you see that gap close quickly is actually the more rural areas rather than the more urban ones, where we get caught up in definitions and sort of the more technical aspects of things. And I think that's the majority of the work that we've got to do, right? We've got to look at how we rebalance that unequal power relations, the unequal power dynamics that exist societally, within homes, within communities, within institutions. But it does become something of a chicken and egg situation. Like, what comes first? Do our constitutional rights and legislations come first, or does the mindset and attitude change that perhaps needs to happen in terms of society? What is it? What do we need to look at first? Do they go hand in hand? Do we need to start thinking about mobilizing one end more? So I'd perhaps love to go to you, Tasneem, first on this, and then the other panelists as well. Please feel free to jump in when you've got something to add. You might need to unmute yourself.
Yes. Right. So The question about legislative or constitutional change and societal change, and which comes first and which comes second, I think it's perhaps more useful to think about the relationship between legislative and constitutional change and societal change as being dynamic and reciprocal. In a sense, to echo what you were saying, Trisha, they do work hand in hand. And we've seen this most starkly with women's issues, whether it was the abolition of sati, widow remarriage, or more recently with protecting women from sexual harassment in the workplace. A lot of these changes have actually been brought about by women's movements, either by women directly or, as Professor Rajiv was saying, through proxy. By their male allies. And even with the example of Sabrimala that I gave you, or what Umang was talking about, where women are embracing the power that culture gives them within the context of the rights that the Constitution promises them to bring about change. And at times that change has to be, almost, and I hate to use this word because it's so strong, but almost forcefully brought about. And that's what I mean by the top-down approach of legislative change. But sometimes the change happens very organically, which is bottoms up. And perhaps the latter is far more powerful and far more sustainable than the former. But that doesn't mean that, whilst we wait for society to catch up to where women are today, that women should suffer. So if the woman of modern India has moved ahead in realizing the power that her culture gives us, in understanding the protection that the Constitution offers her, then that power should be fully built upon, nourished, and used by her. And if that change happens through legislation, then so be it.
Fair enough. I think what this brings me to is the second area that we thought we'd focus on today, which is how do we take all of these changes that are happening and how do we unleash the economic power and potential of women, right? As Ambassador reminded us, and as the PM has often said, without Nari Shakti, the transformation of India won't be complete. And we are in a phase now where we are moving away from women's development. We are past that era of women's development. We are in the era of women-led development. So there's what we've effectively established today is there's two ways of doing this. You've got obviously building economic and developmental policies that will support and encourage women. You've got enforcing laws and constitutional rights that will give women the power to protect themselves. But it's not merely about changing policy. It's not merely about changing laws. It's about adaptability and the kind of work that we need to do on the ground level in terms of giving women the confidence to say, okay, I can exist both in a role as in a societal role, as well as move into the workplace as a citizen in my own right. So I'd love to perhaps hear your take on this, Dr. Rajiv, as well as yours, Umang, on the realities at ground level and how, what are the things specifically that are helping with development?
Thank you. And I think the answer was a very good answer that the panelist gave to us. But I think what happens is that two things should happen simultaneously. The Constitution gives us the right and the support and the mindset of people that has to change. Because until and unless the mindset changes, and I have seen these changes in my own life. My husband or in my family, men do not do too much work. But I see my sons helping their wives do the cooking, take the children to school, and supporting them in whatever they are doing. So I think this economic development and the change in mindset is something that will help us first in building the psychology, the mindset, and I think also the net of sisterhood is very, very important for me. Because if I am empowered, I should also be able to empower the others. So, for example, if someone is there, the woman can be an icon and she can help the other person in raising her. And I think this system of uplifting others is what is so different when you empower women, because it is like as a sister, as a network of women, we are working. And when I was working for this for capacity building of women managers in higher education, we used to stand out and support those women who actually did not find a place in higher education. For example, even now, we have about less than 5% women vice chancellors in our state universities. But we will build and support each other. So I think the paradigm of women's leadership is very, very different. First is
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what we're seeing here is like there's lots of inspiration to be found in. I'm always harping on about this. There's lots of inspiration to be found in women having a seat at the table. But I think what's far more inspirational is women building tables of their own, that tables where we can support other women, lift other women, mentor other women. And I think that effectively is what you're doing, Umang. You're doing a lot of that work on the ground, working with women, getting them skilled up, helping them, take charge of a lot of the development policies and initiatives that our government is running. So would you like to maybe talk a little bit about what are the specific things that have helped women on the ground level that you're working with?
I think I will talk to you about education, because
Sorry,
that is
just going to Dr. Rajiv. I was just going to Umang to get her take
okay.
on
Sure.
policies she's using within her organization to help these women.
Yeah. So the first the program that we have for training women is that we have divided our complete training program. It's a 10 months program that we do. It's kind of a fellowship that we do with these women artisans in a cluster, and the trainings are divided in few days. Because we know that the women that we are working with are not very educated, so the training program is in a form of more of activities, and we want them to understand the concept, and then we handhold them to use that concept or to use that tool or to use that policy for their upliftment. So, like I said, it is divided in entrepreneurship. So there's a module on entrepreneurship, there's a module on financial education inclusion, there's a module on digital skilling, there's a module on production, quality, design, digital selling, and so on. But the most important thing that we do, while we are training the women, is to introduce them to the policies that the government of India runs for them, the state policies, the government central policies, that are beneficial to them as individual or and also as an entrepreneur. So we introduce them to saving schemes that are there, the insurance schemes that are beneficial for them, the schemes where we were talking about the Sukanya Lakshmi Yojana. A lot of our women in Bagh registered their daughters for that, because they found it very useful and they were not aware of it. We introduced them to savings in post offices, how they can save for their they can collect their pension for their old age, how they can save for their daughter's marriage while working, how important the concept of saving is for them, and then a difference between saving and investment and an expense, all these things, while also telling them about these schemes where they can save. So mudra loan, a lot of our women, a lot of women that we work with are also part of the self-help group movement that comes under the SRLM, State Rural Livelihood Mission, or the National Rural Livelihood Mission, and they're all formed. They have all formed self-help groups where they do savings. The government gives them loan, gives them order to work with. So how they are using it for their own benefit in a more sustainable manner. we are helping them build business models. Can you believe that, you know, in Bagh, women who have not even seen schools and colleges um, are now talking about BMC, the business model canvas, and they are building business model canvas for their own businesses, enterprises, for their networks. You know, while we were doing our endline survey after the 10 months, we were asking every woman how the program changed their life, and 4 women um, created their own group, and by using digital media, because they're all tribal and they wear lehengas, they knew how to stitch. So they sold around 100 lehengas in just the matter of 3 months using WhatsApp business, and you know, selling, making videos and selling it, and did business of around 4 lakh rupees. You know, so that's what, you know, when you make women aware of the policies, it doesn't matter even if they are educated or not educated. Our policies are such that they can benefit the very, you know, I mean, you know, women who are not even educated. So that's what, you know, anyone can take advantage of these policies, and I think our policies are made for everybody.
I think that's a great example of how just knowing that that support system exists and is available to you can give you the confidence to take the next bold step. Because 9 times out of 10, that's all that you need. You've got everything within yourself to be able to set up an enterprise or to, you know, stitch 400 lehengas and sell them. But it's knowing that, you know, if all else fails, I've got a safety net, I've got a backup plan. And that's what our constitution and our legislature and the policies, the development policies that we've got, that's what it essentially provides. It's that safety net, it's that idea that we've got your back, which can really help push people forward, and particularly push women forward where there's already often a tussle going on at home on various other aspects. So wonderful. I will just invite my panelists, if anyone's got a couple of short sentences to add. We're just about running out of time, so if anyone's got anything to add, we can take that now. Okay, fantastic. I think it's been a wonderfully enlightening discussion and a very engaging discussion. And what I think what we can all agree on is that there's a lot that's changing. There's still a lot of gaps to be addressed. But I think, as we said, with closing that gap between constitution and tradition, with understanding that they don't have to be mutually exclusive, that we can have our rights as individuals and still play our roles in society as you know, sisters, mothers, whatever have you, that the two things do not need to be mutually exclusive. I think that's a huge part of how we take this work forward in closing that gap and making sure that we are moving towards Amrit Kal and moving towards 2047 with the view to women leading the development of India, not just the development of women. Thank you all so much. Thank you, panelists. And yeah, with that, I will close the discussion. And I hope that was enjoyable for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Trisha and the embassy for inviting all of us and my co-panelists who enriched it by their comments, by sharing their experiences. Thank you for bringing us all together.
Thank you, and happy Women's Day once again.
Happy Women's Day, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.